After today's detailed testing and brand new discovery, I'm now even more convinced that many of you guys should be buying a new MacBook Pro instead of buying the brand new Mac Studio. And I'll explain exactly why, and with that, who should buy a Mac Studio instead of a MacBook, the select few. We're gonna get into some details and those new discoveries with some of these tests, and then give you guys the pros and cons. Now, when these MacBooks came out, we were very impressed. They were amazing in terms of battery life, performance, and fan noise, but they did have some limitations. We found out that the clock speeds would actually run lower when you max them out, whereas the M1 chip would keep a steady 3.2 gigahertz, and we thought that was because Apple wanted to save battery with this system. That definitely helps not to running at peak wattage, and also that there were some thermal limitations with some throttling. We made videos about that. Now, with the new Mac Studios, we knew that we have some of the same chips, and without having to worry about battery life, and with having this new beefy cooler that literally runs the CPU at 60 degrees Celsius and the GPU even lower in our benchmarking tests, they could give it a lot more performance and not worry with throttling and make it such a great deal for $2,000 for this base model that you get better performance, quieter temps, and it's an amazing machine. Now let's go ahead and look at the facts. Starting off with Geekbench 5, here the performance is actually slightly lower than in the MacBooks. Within margin of error, maybe it's because of the SSD being not on the motherboard, but it is a little bit lower. Now in terms of Cinebench, here this is where the power was limited, or the frequency for the CPU, and we see that the performance is very similar. And when we look at the actual frequencies, it still drops down even though it is running so cool and plugged into the wall. Now, as far as real world applications that hit the CPU, for example, Lightroom photo editing and exporting, the times are the same. Same thing with computer programming that hits the CPU. There is no performance difference between these systems. Now on the GPU side, we have a couple versions of the M1 Max. Like I said, this is the base model, and the MacBook that I'm gonna show you some of the results from are also the 24-core version. That is a better deal on the MacBook side. Now for those of you guys that need extra graphics performance compared to the M1 Max, and you're wondering, how does the M1 Ultra compare? Well, we are gonna be doing a video with the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra, both versions, compared to the best MacBook Pro, to show you if it's worth spending the extra money and getting a desktop instead of a laptop for your specific use case. So if you guys want to see that super interesting video, make sure you guys click the subscribe button down below. Now, as far as the graphics performance between these, there's no difference. Doesn't matter if it's Blender, doesn't matter if you're gaming, and it doesn't matter for video editing, even for things that just absolutely hammer the CPU. There's no extra performance difference. Now we know the actual wattage of the GPU also was limited in the MacBooks, and even the 14-inch MacBooks, especially with the M1 Max models, they are actually clocked lower on those to save battery life and to help with heat. Now looking at this computer here, the Mac Studio, it seems like the same limitations for the laptops have been placed in here. And what proved it to me was when I ran the absolute most difficult test, which maxes out the CPU, it's decoding raw with the CPU, and then encoding and downscaling to 4K from 8K with the GPU. Now in the MacBooks, the 24-core M1 Max actually beat out the 32-core because of how much thermal throttling was happening. And instead of running at about 1,000 megahertz for the 32, the 24 ran at 1,1250. So we got some throttling, and it was running at like 95 degrees Celsius. Now I expected this Mac Studio to do much better in this torture test that takes over 7 minutes, but it actually was 4 seconds slower. And with that, not only do we have the same limitations of the CPU, we're not getting any extra performance, but the actual downclocking here also happened, and it didn't run at the full 1300, it ran at 1250 as well. Even though we have more headroom for GPU power usage, it's running literally, the GPU is running at 61 Celsius, the hottest GPU cluster. The CPU is running at 71 degrees Celsius, and we are running at base fan speeds. So what this tells me, and what we verified with the other Mac Studios like the M1 Ultra, is that with this specific chip, for people that want to buy the M1 Max versions, Apple, they are not giving you any extra performance, and they literally took the same exact tuning from the profiling and the wattage and limitations from the laptops, and they put the chip in here without any changes. Now, why would they do that? Well, there's a couple options. One, there could just be hardware limitations, but because we tested out the M1 Ultra chip, that seemed to do better, like it had different tuning. Two, it could be because Apple wants the same chips to perform the same across the board. So you choose the performance chip you want, the graphics, and it doesn't matter if you buy a MacBook or a Mac Studio with way better cooling and no battery, they are gonna perform the same to give you consistent results. And three, what I think is probably happening is, if Apple went ahead and took this chip and gave it extra performance, let it get a little bit more GPU power usage to be able to clock faster and not be limited, both CPU and GPU, well, that would make this quite a bit faster than the MacBook, make it even better of a deal. But when the M2 came out, it wouldn't be that much of a performance increase. But since they're keeping this chip locked down, just like the same performance as the MacBooks, when that M2 comes out, it is going to have a much bigger gap in performance if they go ahead and raise the clock speeds for the GPU and the CPU, and they increase the architecture efficiencies. So that is what we ended up finding out. Don't expect any more performance, and with that, the limitations that we have in some of the tests, they are still here. They could have added a little bit more GPU power and not had that limitation. They didn't. The tuning is identical. Now, why would you want to buy the MacBook Pro? Well, you are going to spend a little bit more money. In the case of the 16-inch, that'll be $1,100 if you want to spec it the same. That's a lot. Or $900 if you're getting a 24-core for the 14-inch, which I would not get the 32. But you are getting a display that is extremely good, better than any laptop display out there. And with the Mac Studio, you will never get a display this good. Even if the $1,600 Studio display does not compete quality-wise to this 1600 nit brightness display. With that, you're getting some great speakers, you're getting a webcam that's much better than the Mac Studios, you're getting the keyboard, you are getting the trackpad, you are getting a battery, and of course, you could take it with you. In the past, when we did these kind of comparisons, it was always like, well, the laptop, it's louder, it's hotter, it's quite a bit slower. The screen was nowhere near as good, the speakers weren't as good as they are now, but you can take it to go. The desktop, well, you know, it's a lot better, a lot faster, but you're locked down. In this case, now, with these new machines, you don't get any more performance. Now, you will end up losing some of these ports. Instead of getting 4 Thunderbolt and 2 USB-C, 2 USB-As, you're gonna be limited by 3, and then you have the SD card reader, of course, separate charging port. But if you're gonna be taking a laptop and docking it at your desk, you can get an inexpensive Thunderbolt, $150 dock, gives you 3 extra Thunderbolt ports because these all have their own controllers. So it'll give you USB type A. That can be fixed pretty easily. Now you'll deal with a little bit more fan noise for the situations where you're maxing out the CPU and the GPU. It's also pretty rare for most workloads. Usually it's one or the other. So now I would just say, unless you want to get an M1 Ultra, or unless you definitely don't care about a laptop, this is a much better bang for the buck, even though you'll pay a little bit more, so much more flexibility, and you're not losing any performance compared to getting a desktop machine. So there you guys go. Go ahead and click that circle above if you want to see that triple Mac Studio with the Ultra against the best MacBook Pro video. Check out one of those great videos over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.